Hey there. Well, yesterday I got the very first version of the very first official Boy Scouts of America knife. And coincidentally, that was the same day the Boy Scouts of America declared bankruptcy. So a sad day for a venerable institution that I think did a lot of good over the years, helping boys, grow into fine young men. But anyway, kind of a sad day for the Scouts. I wouldn't count them out though. That's a good organization still in a lot of ways. They're just going through some changes. But anyway, so this is the very first Boy Scout of America knife. Official Scout knife. You won't find an older one than this. This was made by the New York Knife Company under the Hammer brand. And if you've watched my videos in this series, you've probably heard some of this before, but just as background, the Boy Scouts of America was formed in 1910. Just 1 year later, in 1911, they issued their first official Boy Scout knives. They actually issued two models. They issued this 3 5/8 inch 4-blade equal end utility knife with bone handles that you see here on the table. And they also issued a 3 1/2 inch 2-blade jackknife with ebony handles. Both of those knives had a very unique feature. They both had really large bales. This one is missing the bale, obviously. We'll talk about that in a minute. Bigger than any bale that I've ever seen on any other Scout knife. They also both had a banner shield that read, "Be prepared." And they also both had a blade etch, which had the motto, "Be prepared," and the tenderfoot emblem, which is a little different than later Scout knives. Most of those had a blade etch that reads "Official Knife, Boy Scouts of America," with the first class emblem. So this knife actually ran from 1911 through 1916. And then in 1917, they dropped that large permanently attached bale and started using this smaller removable bale. It's the same frame. They did that on both of the models, this utility knife and the jackknife. It's the same frame. There are some other subtle differences, which I'll point out that will be interesting when we look at these two knives in detail. And then in 1923, there was one other change to the same knife, but at that year, two other companies started issuing official Boy Scout of America knives. Remington and Ulster were allowed to offer official knives. Up to that point, New York Knife Company had a monopoly. So in 1923, New York Knife Company Hammer brand started putting this oval shield with the first class emblem and the motto "Be prepared" on this knife here. And then in 1926, they brought out an entirely new model that you see here. It was radically different. You could get a spear point blade or a clip point blade. It had a very different screwdriver. It had a combination can opener, cap lifter, and it had a spiraled awl. So I've done a video on this knife. It's a really interesting knife. I'll put a card or a link to that. So they made that knife then from 1926 up until 1931 when New York Knife Company went out of business. Okay, when I first saw this knife online, eBay of course, I was looking at the pictures and I wanted to upgrade this knife because it is missing its awl. It has a broken awl which is missing. So I've always wanted to upgrade it and I've been looking for another, and I saw this knife and at first I thought, well, it's missing its shackle, it's removable shackle, and somebody has filled the hole with a rod or a plug or something. And then I got to looking at it and I thought, wait a minute, that hole is not even in the same position on the bolster. And you can see here. And that's when it occurred to me that this was actually the first version that used to carry that very large awl. It was just missing. And these are actually the posts that are peened out that are still in place there. I plan to make a new bale for this just for display purposes. I'm going to take some nickel silver rod and try to fabricate a bale. So that might be a subject of another video. Not to try to deceive anyone, this will always be shown as having its bale replaced, but I think if I could fabricate one that looked close to the original, it might be kind of neat to put it on there. I don't think I could ever just find a replacement bale for this because they were very large. They were I'll put a picture in. Now the interesting thing about that picture, that's from one of the very first ads, which incorrectly showed the bail on the main blade end. So anyway, I said, that's probably the first version of the very first Boy Scout knife from 1911 to up through 1916. But what really cinched it for me was I could barely make out these numbers on the back of the awl here. And that's a patent number. You can see PAT 6-10-02. If this had been the first version knife, and again, I'm sorry, if that had been the second version knife, again, I don't have an awl here on this one to show you, but if it had been the second version knife, that patent number would be 701,878. So when I was able to make out that number, and it was difficult to read because it was under some corrosion, I realized that this was the very, very first version of the Boy Scout knife. So I acquired it and wanted to point out a couple other differences while we're on that subject. One thing I've noticed since I've had them in hand is that the can opener pull is a little different. Here you have, I don't know if I'd call it a horizontal pull, but it's less of a deep, it's not as deep of a vertical pull if it is a vertical pull. This one has a deeper vertical pull, and because of that, there's a notch in the cover and the scale to accept that, and there is not on this model. So other than the awls, the patent number on the punch, the cutout for the can openers, one other difference I found, and that is the older knife there on the left is thinner than the more recent knife on the right. And I think you can see that's because the middle spacer is thinner and it's made of brass rather than carbon steel. One other thing I wanted to point out about this knife while we're on the subject of the can opener and the awl is that they have half stops. Listen to the snap on this old knife. But the front tools do not have half stops, the blade and the screwdriver. And that is the same on all of these New York Knife Company knives that I have. Half stops in the back, but not on the front. Okay, so we've looked at the awl and we looked at the can opener. Let's just look at the last two implements on this knife. We'll start with the screwdriver cap lifter. It's just pretty standard. But it does have a stamping on it that all these had, and this is where it says New York, first line, Knife Co., second line, Walden, third line. And on the main blade, these had spear point blades with a short nail nick. Now, they were never as wide of blades as many other later Scout knives. Most other Scout knives featured a very pronounced spear point blade with a very deep belly. I think really that gave young Scouts the opportunity to sharpen those knives a lot before their blade was wasted away. These were never that wide. These were always fairly narrow spear point blades. Maybe I can put in another picture. But you can see that this one has been sharpened away a bit over the years. Then again, we're looking at a knife that is well over 100 years old. You know, it's not really probably fair to put this knife in my series, Boy Scout Knives of the Greatest Generation, because that's supposed to be Boy Scouts that could have grown up and gone on to serve and sacrifice or fight and die in World War II. This could be a pre-World War I knife. So whoever owned this may have gone on to fight in World War I. It's that old. Anyway, here's the tang stamp, and it's the same on all three of these knives. It's just difficult to read on this one. It says Hammer brand, and then there is an image of a little arm holding a forging hammer that comes up through the M's on Hammer. Here you can just kind of see it says Ham brand. Let me show you another one that is a little clearer. Okay, so if you bought this knife somewhere between 1911 and through 1916, you would have had to have paid a whopping $1. But have heart if you couldn't have afforded that. The other model, the two-blade jackknife with ebony handles, again, remember, with a blade edge, a nickel silver badge, a bail, that would have set you back 50 cents. When they came out with the second version in 1917, wow, there was a huge price increase. This knife now cost a usurious $1.50, and the jackknife with ebony handles, 75 cents. So, my friends, that is the long-term effect of inflation. All right, there you have a look at the very first version of the very first Boy Scout knife of America, made by the New York Knife Company under their Hammer brand. Also, the second generation that came out in 1917, and their second model, which they introduced in 1926. That's a pretty interesting lineup if you're into old vintage knives. I thank you for watching, and have fun collecting.